speak. Again, we'll do it for the third time. I'm up at the regional council chambers here. I just wanted to check to make sure the staff were all working, so I came up for the drive. Anyway, this is the Waste Management Strategic Advisory Committee meeting. Call to order. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Approval of the agenda. Any changes?
Say the protocol, Councillor Starr.
Eh?
The
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going to go through the usual protocol with the COVID announcements, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Councillor Starr. Good afternoon. Welcome to the October 1st Waste Management Strategic Advisory Committee meeting. We have been having electronic participation meetings for a few months now, so I'm going to provide a shortened review of the protocols for electronic participation in this regular committee meeting. With the increase in the public gathering limits, the gradual reopening of facilities, and the recent amendment to the procedure bylaw that allows for electronic participation, members of council now have the option to participate either in person or electronically, subject to occupancy in the limits in the council chamber and the masking bylaw. This meeting is being streamed live from the Region of Peel website. Some members are participating in this meeting electronically, and some members are present in the chambers. In-person attendees will be identified at roll call. For those participating electronically and for an optimum meeting experience, we ask that you please take the necessary measures to avoid feedback, interference, and confusion with members speaking over one another. The recommended WebEx meeting display view is active speaker and thumbnail video view to have a full view of the presentation slides and other meeting materials. During the presentation, the slides will be visible on your screen. If you have difficulty viewing the slides, a copy of the slides were provided to you last week with the committee agenda package. If you're experiencing poor Wi-Fi connection, please disable your video. If you drop off the meeting, please rejoin, and if you have technical difficulties, please contact your local IT department first for assistance, following the process as you do for local council meetings. As required, your local IT department will reach out to regional IT staff for further assistance. Because of the nature of this hybrid meeting and to ensure equitable participation for members attending both in person and electronically, the request to speak system in the chambers will not be used. Instead, if you are attending in person and wish to speak, please raise your hand physically and you will be added to the speakers list. When called upon, please press the speak button to unmute your microphone and proceed. When you have concluded your comment or question, please mute your microphone by pressing the speak button again. Excuse me. If you are participating electronically through WebEx and wish to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon located to the right of your name in the participant list. Your hand icon will turn blue when engaged. When called upon, please unmute your microphone and proceed. When you have concluded your comments or question, please mute your mic and lower your hand by pressing the blue hand icon to the right of your name. Members who connect to the meeting via the dial-in option can send an email to council@peelregion.ca and you will be added to the speakers list. Clerk staff will manage the speakers list and provide the chair with the names of the members wishing to speak. If you are participating electronically and are leaving the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca to indicate that you are leaving the meeting. If you leave the meeting for any votes thereafter, you will be marked as absent. If you have any questions as we proceed through the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca. If you have any motions or amendments to introduce regarding today's business, please email your motion to council@peelregion.ca, identifying yourself as the mover. Please note that a seconder is not required at committee. Each motion will be read in its entirety prior to calling a vote. Recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. For committee votes, the chair or the clerk will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please unmute your microphone and indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. During the presentation, we recommend that you close your participation list so that you have a full view of the presentation slides. We now shall commence the meeting with a roll call. Please indicate your presence by responding here when called upon. Councillor Dillon? Councillor Dillon?
Sorry, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Fortini?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Groves?
I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Anika?
Here.
Councillor Ennis?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kovacs is absent due to personal matters. Councillor Mahoney?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pleshy?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Raz?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Starr is noted as present in the council chamber. I will now pass the meeting back to our committee chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or comments? Seeing none, we're actually going to be adding 4.1, which is a update by Norm Lee with respect to the waste management services during COVID-19, and this will be dealt as the first item of business, and we'll need a motion to that effect. Councillor Innes, would you, that's okay?
Sure.
And further, the agenda for the October 1st, 2020 Waste Management Strategic Advisory Committee meeting be approved as amended. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we'll get on to that first item then. Approval of the agenda. All in favor? Thank you. Delegation. So we'll hear the delegation now from Norm Lee. Norm, are you someplace out there?
Yes, I'm right here. If somebody can load the.
Okay,
The
go ahead
slide deck.
anytime you're ready.
Sorry,
the
Norm.
slides.
This would be your additional item on an update on the waste services for COVID.
Oh, sorry. This is the one update on the waste services for COVID. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry about the confusion. Staff have been sending out biweekly updates to council, giving just an indication of what the service levels are as we add and remove services during the year, and I just wanted to provide a brief update on that. So when COVID first hit back in February, March, we suspended a number of services to reduce the risk of transmission and to ensure that we could provide waste management services over the long term. Some examples include the suspension of exemption periods and conservation days, the suspension of electronic and bulky waste collection at CRCs, and the closure of reuse stores. And as you know, Council also allowed 2 extra bags of garbage at the curb each collection cycle and waived fees at CRCs for residents who were at home to help them out with the extra garbage they were generating. As you would have seen in the updates, we've been reintroducing services in a measured way, and most of them have actually returned to normal. A few have not. Residents can still set out 2 extra bags of garbage without tags. CRC fees are still waived for loads less than 100 kilograms. CRCs are still not accepting tires and are not selling compost, backyard composters, or kitchen containers, and are not accepting cash payments. We continue to monitor the situation, and while we're preparing for a possible resurgence, we're also assessing the best time to return the remaining services to normal. The next big change will likely be a recommendation by staff to reinstate full fees at CRCs, as the data is showing that the need for the waived fees is diminishing and could soon be gone. We're also keeping a close eye on the need for the 2 free bags of garbage as we enter the fall and winter seasons when waste generation is typically at its lowest. Both of these items we're monitoring and will probably continue to monitor through the month of October and should have a recommendation or hope to have a recommendation at that time. We're also preparing a report on some changes that we think should be continued beyond the pandemic and that report should be on one of the agendas for the Waste Committee in the very near future. So overall, there have been a few supply chain issues and a few small problems, but generally waste services have continued to meet expectations. As you would have read in the updates, there's market challenges with glass from Peel's Blue Box program due to ceramic in it. And we do have an education campaign underway to remind residents that ceramic dishes and ceramic tiles do not go in the Blue Box. And the one market in Ontario for plastic grocery bags and other plastic film has stopped accepting film from Peel and from a number of other municipalities because the price for virgin plastic is so low they can't compete. On that one, efforts are underway to strengthen the market and to advocate for regulatory changes. All other materials collected in the Blue Box continue to move. On the financial side, the pandemic has increased costs and reduced revenues within waste management for a net impact of around $5 million so far. With that, I welcome your comments and questions.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Are there any questions or comments from committee?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It's
Okay, you're
Councillor
coming
Rass.
up
Can I
now.
speak?
Okay, Councillor Rass?
Yeah, sorry, I put my hand up, but I don't think we're using this, right? We need to email the clerk for questions?
Yeah, either way. Yeah,
You can
Okay.
raise your hand and we can see you from our screen.
yeah, you can go
Okay.
ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you for the update, Norm. Just can you talk a little bit more about the plastic bags? So typically people can put them in the blue bins for recycling, and now you're saying that we might be moving away from that. Where's the alternative for disposal?
No. We're asking residents to continue putting their plastic bags in the blue bin.
Okay.
We're hoping that this is a temporary disruption in the market and that they'll be accepting bags again very soon. So we're asking people to continue putting them in. In the meantime, we're looking for any other option that we can for these bags other than sending them to landfill. But
So right now, people are putting them in the blue bin, and we're removing them from the stream and putting them into landfill?
we continue to separate them and bale them, and some of them we have sitting in storage, waiting for a solution. We're going to start. We're getting quite a few in storage, so we're going to start incinerating some of them, sending some of them to Emerald Energy in the next couple of weeks, just to keep our inventories at a reasonable level. And we're continuing to work with the province, and we'll start working with the federal government too about recycled content in other bags. And the company, and I've seen letters to some of our municipalities, they're asking municipalities to start specifying minimum recycled content when they buy garbage bags, just to create a demand for recycled plastic film.
Okay, and I'm assuming that the folks at Emerald Energy would have the proper capture and capacity to deal with this type of waste stream?
They did. We had long conversations with them to make sure it could be done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands coming up or on either way. Are there any other questions? Okay, Councillor Rass, will you move receipt of the deputation? All those in favor? Thank you, Norm. And down to the reports, we have a report 5.1, which is again an oral report with respect to the mixed waste processing pilot. Yeah, go ahead, Norm, anytime you're ready.
Okay, so I may need a little bit of technical help on this because I've got every single participant up on my screen, and I've got the slide deck showing in a 2-inch by 2-inch square. Is there a way to get that to show over the entire screen?
Please change your screen to active speaker video view.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so this is an update on the mixed waste processing pilot. Next slide, please. Peel's waste management long-term plan identifies mixed waste processing and some of its risks. We know that a pilot would help resolve some of those risks. At the last committee meeting, staff was directed to report back with information on a possible pilot, things like timing, scope, cost, risk, outcomes, and procurement. And today's update is just to share the work plan for how we intend to do that. Next slide, please. Some of the key milestones: we spent August working on background research and project development. We've spent September and will continue through October discussing interest with other municipalities, confirming siting constraints, finalizing the scope and outcomes of the pilot, and preparing a request for expression of interest, which will be issued in November, and the process will last into January, where respondents give us their submissions, and then we hold commercially confidential meetings with them. In Q1 of next year, we'll finish our analysis of all the responses and report to Waste Management Committee with our findings. Next slide, please. So a number of other municipalities are interested in mixed waste processing, and some are conducting their own investigations. So if we do partner with another municipality, and if they provide waste tonnage, it could increase the benefit of the pilot, and it could reduce Peel's cost and Peel's risk. Partner with others, of course, adds complexity and could require additional time. So staff will reach out to Ontario municipalities directly, and we'll do it through the Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario as well. And we will include our findings and recommendations in the final report. Next slide, please. Siting is an important part of any project development like this. So staff have reviewed some of the planning constraints to help identify potential and suitable sites within Peel. Things like setback requirements from residential zones, the airport's bird hazard zone, and the Niagara escarpment prohibitions and requirements. So staff will, over the next month, will meet with local planning staff to refine the screening in preparation for our discussions with the REOI respondents. And again, we will include the findings in the final report. Next slide, please. The project outcomes, this is what we want the pilot really to achieve. And our initial thinking is, we want output products that divert additional recyclables, divert additional organics, and possibly fuels at levels that enable the region to meet its diversion targets, all at a reasonable cost. We want the output products that consistently satisfy regulatory and market demands. We want the facility whose performance is reliable and that can accommodate changes in waste composition. We know between summer and winter, composition changes a bit, as it does year over year. We want a facility that's consistently in compliance with regulatory requirements and not causing any offsite impacts like noise, odor, dust. We want the sharing of facility operational data and analytical work. This is, of course, a pilot that's intended to support future decision-making, with respect to mixed waste. So staff will seek industry feedback on these outcomes through the REOI process. And again, we'll include findings and recommendations in the final report. Next slide, please. The scope and key terms really define who's responsible for what and who takes on which risks. So our initial thinking is that the contractor would provide the facility and the site. They would process the garbage, they would market the outputs, and they would dispose of any residue. They would meet performance milestones during the development of the facility, and they would meet performance outcomes during the operation. They would monitor and report to the region and the ministry and to other potential municipal partners. The region's responsibility, of course, is to supply garbage. We would focus on multi-residential garbage and supplement with curbside garbage if needed. And of course, other municipalities might also supply garbage. Our current thinking is the pilot would be somewhere between 25,000 and 100,000 tons of garbage per year. So it would be a full commercial scale pilot so that we can rely on the data. We would also pay an all-in tip fee for that. What's not shown in this slide is that our initial thinking is the pilot would last about 5 years, and that if the project is successful, there could be options to extend the contract beyond that for operations. So we will seek feedback on these key terms through the REOI process, and of course we'll include the findings and our recommendations in the final report. Next slide, please. The REOI will be posted on the region's website and will be open to all vendors who might be interested in it. It will present the preliminary outcomes in key terms that I just mentioned. It'll invite proponents to comment on those and to propose alternatives that they would want to see to make the project viable. The process permits staff to hold commercially confidential meetings with respondents, and again, for the purpose of discussing all of that. And we will, once we're done that, we will report back with our findings and recommendations. Next slide, please. So next steps, just a kind of summary, we will continue to explore interest amongst other municipalities. We will review siting possibilities and restrictions with local municipalities. We will finalize and issue the REOI and then hold the commercially confidential meetings. And finally, we will report back to the committee with our findings. We will, as required and as appropriate, we will continue to provide interim updates to the committee if we find the need arises. Next slide, please. With that, I would be happy to take any questions or feedback.
Thank you, Norm. I see Councillor Ross and then the Chair Unica next. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I had the full screen on, so I couldn't put my hand up. Thank you for the presentation, Norm. When we converse with other municipalities and look at them as potential partners for this, I worry, well, I don't worry, how much longer will that delay the process? Because this pilot's going to be going on for years, or are we going to continue with our procurement process? And at what point can they hop in the process and come on board?
I guess the final answer will come with our final report once we've had a chance to talk to them. But my sense is we want to keep going. We don't want to really slow this down. It depends on what the commercial arrangements are with the other municipalities. It could be as simple as us building the facility, or we enter into a contract with a proponent to build and operate the facility for us, and then we just have a side agreement where a municipality can supply a certain amount of tonnage at a certain cost.
But that doesn't really allow us to spread the risk for the actual development of the project, right?
No, it kind of spreads out the cost a little bit more. If to enter into a joint venture type of agreement where we and another municipality or perhaps 2 or 3 other municipalities jointly procure this, that would probably slow it down a little bit, just because it takes time to enter into that joint venture. We'd have to set out all the terms, and of course, chances are we don't agree 100% on every one of those terms. So we'll have those discussions over the next month with them. We'll talk about different possibilities and timing, and we'll come back with our best recommendations and advice on that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Chair Unica.
Thank you, Chair Starr. I'm going to be very brief. I just want to thank Norm for all his effort and for Andrew for all his efforts on this file. This has taken some work, but I'm glad we're doing it right, and I have to commend the staff. I also have to commend Chair Starr for all the effort that he's put in it and wanting to see if there are other ways we can do this smarter. But I also want to report to the committee, one of the real driving forces has been Minister Urick. And I'm going to say 6 months ago when I met with him on various files, a tip of a hat to him and his department, because I'm going to try to say it charitably, over the years, the Ministry of the Environment's been perhaps one of the impediments to innovation and new ways of doing things. And the minister made very clear that's not going to happen under his watch. And I want to single out the minister in thanking him. And I'm going to speak on his behalf to a degree. The reason he's become such a proponent of this innovation is he wants innovation. He wants us to deal with mixed waste processing so that we can divert waste from landfill. And that's a very big imperative for the minister. And I think it comes from the riding that he's in as well. And we also want to see who's got the next best mousetrap and what can we do with some of the other technologies around the world that we hear about. And Councillor Starr's biggest point, he may chime in, and we finally address the multi-res, which we know is the future, and yet we've done virtually nothing. And 30, 40, 50% of what comes out to us is from a condo building in a big bin that we don't do anything with. And of course, some of these technologies will say, just give us the bin, just as you give us the bag at the curb, and leave the rest of it to us. So this is very, very exciting. And with kudos to everybody involved. But as I say, Chair Starr spent a lot of time on it, so has Norm. I know there's a lot of interested proponents out there. Now we're putting it in their court saying, wow us, tell us what you've got, work with our staff. And final point I'll make is, and Norm will tell you because he's educated me, it is remarkable how many of the great ideas that you come up with, the staff recognize might be an interesting avenue to pursue, but invariably you have to knock on the minister's door. So great idea to the proponent, but that's not us that have to sign off. The ministry has to agree to this. The ministry has to, and we've been given every confidence in a conference call we had months ago that they're very anxious to explore new technologies, and they don't intend to be an impediment, because a big part of what we're asking, the proponent will have to work along with us, but they'll have to do a lot of the heavy lifting to make sure the ministry signs off on a lot of the new things that we want to do. So this is a really exciting time. I'm glad we're doing it appropriately. Hope a lot of people come out and wow us with their ideas. They're going to work with staff, and they'll be bringing something back. So a well done from the minister on down to the chair to Norm. I'm really excited about this. Thank you, Chair Starr.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't see any other hands raised. Norm, I've got a couple of little queries. Are other municipalities, I know that the slide indicated, or you indicated previously, that you're trying to work with other municipalities. Are they doing something similar to this on their own as we speak? You know?
A few of them are and they're at different stages of the process. So Durham Region is interested in mixed waste processing as well, and they have issued a request for, I'd say it's the equivalent of a request for expressions of interest for that and anaerobic digestion. So it's a much bigger project. They've just begun the process. The City of Toronto is interested, and they are at the stage we were a few years ago, where they're just assessing their garbage and looking at technologies around the world. The City of London's interested. I'm not sure where they are in the process, but they've been doing a lot of studying as well. And those are the main ones, I think, that are, the active movers on this. There are some other ones that are kind of keeping tabs on it to see what happens, and whatever we do, they may join in or follow.
In your, I guess, peer group or your discussions, do you folks reach out to each other to try to get together and say, let's, I look at concentric circles, and I look how the areas are expanding so quickly, and what we're going to be looking at in 20 or 30 years, and the population of 6 million in this area. It seems reasonable that there should be something larger rather than several smaller. I mean, I'm not sure the technology, but I guess my question is, are you getting together with all these folks to try to maximize and have the best efficiencies?
We are. We meet through a couple of different forums. There's Regional Public Works Committee, Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario has a waste committee, and we meet regularly, and this is something that gets discussed at that group. But there's actually a mixed waste processing group in Ontario as well. Brian Van Opstal, who's my manager of infrastructure development, he's on this call today. He's part of that group, and they meet regularly to discuss just mixed waste processing. And the folks, the municipalities I mentioned earlier, they're part of that group too. So they meet fairly regularly to talk about it. There has been a bit of a gap over the last few months where they haven't met and haven't had a lot to talk about, but they're starting to get back together now that we're moving on this.
And quick question on where there has to be separation and distancing, where you mentioned the Niagara Escarpment. I know you mentioned that before. The Niagara Escarpment and say the rest of the conservation authorities, etc. How do they fit into this picture of what you're trying to do?
Well, every one of them has its own set of rules and restrictions. So we have to contact each one to talk to them about the project and ask them how it fits into their area of responsibility. So the Niagara Escarpment Commission, they have a lot of restrictions on development within the Niagara Escarpment area that they're responsible for. But there are certain things that can be built. So we just have to check with them to see if this is one of the things that can be built, and if so, where. Same thing, conservation areas. A lot of their stuff is dealing with floodplains. You have to avoid floodplains. The Pearson Airport, GTAA, their main thing is the bird hazard zone. But they also have some height restrictions as you get close to the airport. So we have to meet with all of these different groups to find out what the restrictions are. And we have, Brian has developed a map, a fairly detailed map of the region that, every time we find an area that it can't be, he puts kind of a red X on it. And if it's an area that looks like it's possible, it gets a green tick mark. So we're doing that. Part of the municipal planning, there are setback requirements from residential zones and other sensitive uses. So we just have to confirm what those are. And again, wherever you have a residential zone, if the setback is 300 meters or 800 meters or a kilometer, you draw a circle around it and say nothing can be built within that area. So it's really an exercise of eliminating areas where this type of facility can't be built.
Thank you. And one last quick one is on the supply side of the garbage. I know you're focusing on the multi-res. Is that enough garbage to do what you want to do? I guess the best type of garbage is the supply side okay, or do we have to start going outside? And I know we're also looking at the residential, but
it depends how big the pilot is. Ultimately, if it's 100,000 tons, Peel generates about 60 or 65,000 tons a year of multi-residential garbage. So if we built a facility that was 100,000 tons a year, we would need to either add 40,000 tons of our curbside garbage or find 40,000 tons from other municipalities. It's not, I don't think it's that big of a problem to do curbside garbage because it does include still quite a bit of recyclables and organic material in it. The big advantage of multi-res is they don't have anything right now for organics diversion, so this could help them with that and help them meet their targets. The province, through its food and organic waste action plan and policy statements, they've set targets for food and organic waste diversion from curbside dwellings and from multi-residential dwellings. We're very close to hitting the targets for the curbside dwellings, and when we build the anaerobic digestion facility and are able to add diapers and pet waste to the green bin, we think we'll be at that target. The multi-res homes are nowhere near their target right now, so it'll help them meet that target.
okay, good. Okay, thanks, Norm. I don't see anybody else on the board. We move, Councillor Sinclair, the receipt of the deputation. All those in favor? Carried. Next report is 5.2, which is a curbside non-residential or multi-residential enforcement programs. Next presentation.
I don't have a presentation for it, but if you want, I can take just a couple of minutes and walk you through the report.
Okay.
Okay, so this report presents the findings and recommendations from a enforcement pilot we did to reduce blue box contamination. The pilot ran for over a year and tested various levels of education and enforcement to see what produced sustained behavior change. So as we did the pilot, we kind of saw people's behavior change, and then we'd go back a month or so later to see if they had sustained that behavior change. The curbside portion of it, over the course of a year, we had a team of 6 staff and a team lead. They visited 42 neighborhoods, 17,000 households. And what they would do is visually inspect recycling carts using 3 thresholds for contamination. If it was less than 10%, if it was around a third, or if it was over half contamination. They began with education only, and they found that worked with households who had very little contamination, but it didn't work very well with households that had more contamination. They then moved on to leaving the contamination behind. So if there was a bag of garbage in the blue box, they'd take it out. If there was a single big piece, a toy or something that shouldn't be there, they would take it out. And then they'd still collect the cart and they would provide education. And that seemed to work for folks who had moderate contamination, but not for the ones that had high contamination. So in the final phases, they actually left the entire carts behind. If it was highly contaminated, they would leave it, and that did seem to work for the people who had more contamination. There were actually very few complaints throughout this whole process. There were a lot of questions. Most were very happy that we were not issuing fines, and I think that was their advice, was that if we do enforcement, please save the fines for the very worst offenders. So the good news is that over 60% of households had less than 10% contamination before we even started. And that number grew to over 80% with education alone. So the vast majority of curbside households are doing the right thing and doing a very good job. So we can be very happy about that. The remaining few households, unfortunately, had quite a bit of contamination, some of them well over 50%. And it's bringing our overall contamination level way up. So what seemed to provide sustained results, and what staff is recommending in this report going forward, is that we continue to do this type of, this level of enforcement and education. And where we find less than 10% contamination, we leave a thank you note. If we find between 10 and 30% contamination, we take the big items out of the blue box, leave them behind, collect the recycling, and provide some educational material. And for households with over 30% contamination, so if over a third of what's in the blue box is not supposed to be there, we would leave the cart behind and provide educational material for them to clean up and set it out again the next week. On the multi-res side, most multi-res buildings use what we call front-end bins. They're picked up by trucks that have the forks on the front end that pick them up. So we focused the pilot on those types of bins. And the key finding of the pilot was that locking bins significantly reduces contamination. Most of these bins, the lid locks and they have a slot in the front where people can put blue box materials in. So 50% of the pilot buildings locked their bins before the pilot. That number went up to 80% when we sent them just a simple request to lock them. And it went up to 100% when we sent them a formal notice to comply with, which of course comes with penalties if they don't comply. Another finding was that regular bylaw presence improved compliance over the long term. So what staff is recommending going forward is that we send notice to all buildings to lock their front end bins. that we sent notice to comply to those that don't, and that we continue to have a bylaw officer monitor these buildings. For both curbside and multi-res, bylaw officers continue to have the ability to issue fines when appropriate, but as I think we've talked about over the years, they do that in very few cases. From a staffing perspective, we are recommending 4-year contracts for the staff to coincide with Peel's preferred transition date for the Blue Box program. The reason for that, of course, is that once the Blue Box program transitions to producers, we may not need these people, and those would be funded through general working fund reserves. The team also continued to monitor for extra bags of recyclables set out beside blue carts, and what they found, they spent a lot of time with people who did this. If they set them out regularly, they'd work on how to fit more material into the blue box by breaking down boxes and such. But in cases where the blue boxes were just overfilled, they would provide an extra recycling cart for that household to use, because it's more efficient for our collection crews to collect 2 carts than a cart and a few bags. So staff is recommending that we continue that practice going forward of sending staff out to look, and if they truly do need an extra bin, to provide an extra bin to residents. And with that, I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Great. Thank you, Norm. The first one I see on the board is Councillor Rass. And if I just remind members that just email us at, if you want to speak, at council@peelregion.ca, and that's the easiest way. Thank you. Councillor Rass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Norm, for the presentation. A couple of questions. When staff went out and did the reviews of at both curbside and multi-res, is there a geographic distribution of where some of the problem hotspots were?
They did. They tried to spread it out. A lot of the neighborhoods came from intelligence provided by our collection contractors and our on-road staff, where they noticed that there was extra recycling, or if they thought there were problems. So that's where it came from. But they did try to spread it out across the entire region so that we capture all areas. Okay.
What are we doing for the for curbside pickup for residents who never put out a green bin? I think to presume that people don't have food waste is a bit of a missed opportunity. So is there a plan when they do these reviews, if there's no green bin, to leave a note and maybe some education on that?
That's a good point, because what the team did during the pilot, and what they will continue to do moving forward if this is approved, is they'll do just that. They will be looking at garbage and green bin also, and providing educational materials for both. And of course, as we go out and do it, I think the team that we're recommending can do about 20,000 houses a year. So it'll take a while to get through all of Peel's houses, but they'll be able to keep track of ones who don't set out green bins too, and we can focus a little bit of education on them.
Okay, and maybe if there's certain areas where you could use assistance for outreach from the councillors, I'm sure we'd be happy to help. But if we don't know it's an issue in our area, then we don't know to focus our communications on that. So that would be appreciated.
Okay, no, I appreciate that too. So we would do that.
Thank you.
Okay, any others? We do have a resolution on this, and Councillor Mahoney, would you like to move the resolution? I'll read it out for you. That the region-wide curbside and multi-res enforcement programs be implemented to reduce contamination in the blue box and other waste collection programs as outlined in the report of the interim Commissioner of Public Works titled Curbside and Multi-Residential Enforcement Programs to Reduce Blue Box Contamination. And further, that curbside households that regularly set out extra bags of recycling be provided with education on how to fit more recycling in the blue cart, and where appropriate, as determined by staff, be given a larger or second blue cart as outlined in the subject report. And further, that the report or the programs outlined in the subject report be funded from general working fund reserves. I'm also going to suggest something at the end here, that messaging be made available to members of council so that we can send that out at the same time, because I know that as one, I get a lot of calls. I'm sure every councilor get calls, so it may make it easier, Norm, if somehow through the communication staff that we can add a line in there that we get something that we can send out regularly or whatever. Okay, you've heard the motion. Any comments? Moved by Councilor Mahoney. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Norm. Communications, we don't have any. Other business, any members of council want to bring up any business? Seeing none. In camera, we don't have an in-camera session. The next meeting is Thursday, October 29th, 11 o'clock. And if that gives, as I always say, heartburn to a number of councilors, let us know so that we can change things around. And motion for adjournment, Councilor Rass. All those in favor, have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For those participating in the policies and procedure meeting, please sign out of this waste meeting and then sign back on with the PPC invitation that starts at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.